Parshas Shelach, Tavshinayim Beis. Want to welcome all the new guests here this week, new people that came to the Shiur. Of course, we have our familiar faces, but it's always nice to see new people too. I just would like to preface the Shiur by saying tonight's Shiur, I'd like to do Le'ilu Nishmas, my grandfather, Rav Aaron Yeshaya Shapiro, whose yahrzeit is tonight, tomorrow, Chav Hey Sivan, 31st yahrzeit, I believe. And my grandfather was Rosh Yeshiva in Torah Vadas for 40 years, and was an Altamir, had some chashuv chavrusas during his life. He learned with Rav Shimon Shkab, he learned with Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz, among others. So it was very, very special, tremendous Talmud Chacham, a yid that everybody loved, Bal Midas. And tonight's Shiur should be Le'ilu Nishmas, Rav Aaron Yeshaya ben Rav Yaakov Yitzchak. I was thinking right before the Shiur, very interesting. I didn't see this brought down anywhere, but I thought it's just interesting to note that you have 3 weeks in a row. You know, Nesivas Shalom, we always say, Nesivas Shalom discusses how the time of the year and the parsha that we're in, it's not just something, a history lesson that happened to us many years ago. When it comes to that time of the year, when we read about that parsha, there's a special lesson to be learned for us for today, right now, in the year 2012, Tavshinayim Beis. And I was just looking, you see the last 3 weeks in a row, we have Parshas. Last week, Parshas Ba'aloischa, the end of Parshas Ba'aloischa, we have the Maisa with Miriam, that Miriam Hanaviyah spoke Lashon Hara about Moshe Rabbeinu. We spoke about it in the Shiur last week, we gave a whole Shiur about that. But that, we had the Indian of Lashon Hara in Parshas Ba'aloischa. This week, Parshas Shelach, we have the Indian of Lashon Hara that the Meraglim came back, and the Meraglim spoke Lashon Hara about Eretz Yisrael. Yeah, the Indian of Lashon Hara. And the next week, we have also the Indian of Lashon Hara Machlokes, the Indian of Korach. We have 3 straight weeks, 3 weeks in a row, where during the Parsha, we learn about this horrible Midah, horrible Indian of Lashon Hara and Machlokes. So it could be that it's a very good time of the year to be mispointed, to think a little bit about this Indian of Bein Adam L'Chaveiroi, about being nice to other people, about not speaking Lashon Hara, about Machlokes, being that we have these 3 weeks in a row, Ba'aloischa, Shelach, and Korach, that all 3 weeks the Parsha in some way alludes to this Indian of Lashon Hara Machlokes. At the beginning of this week's Parsha, when the Torah tells us the story, well, we know it's not a story, the Indian of the Meraglim, the Torah expresses to us the chashivas. We learn from the beginning of the Parsha the chashivas of Eretz Yisrael. How terrible it was that the Meraglim came back and spoke Lashon Hara about Eretz Yisrael. The Nesivas Shalom brings down the Mechilta in Parshas Boy. The Mechilta tells us that the Shechina does not reside in Chutz La'aretz. I know, unfortunately, we're giving this Shiur from Chutz La'aretz, so I'm talking to myself when I say all these inyanim about Eretz Yisrael. As much as we love to be there, we're not there. So if we're saying something against us, I'm talking about myself too, that we're sitting here in Chutz La'aretz, unfortunately, then this Mechilta brings down a Parshas Boy that the Shechina does not reside in Chutz La'aretz. The Shechina resides only in Eretz Yisrael. As we see, and he brings a raya from Yoina. We lay Yoina on Yom Kippur in the afternoon, right? The Maisa of Yoina. And what did Yoina want to do? Yoina wanted to run away to Tarshish. And why was Yoina running away to there? Because Yoina was running away to a place, Chutz La'aretz, where the Shechina, he thought, where the Shechina would not be able to find him, where he wouldn't have to, the Shechina would not talk to him. The shleimus of a yid, Zok to Nesivas Shalom, is only when he's in Eretz Yisrael. And the very interesting analogy he brings down, you know that when you talk about growing grapes for wine, what makes one wine substantially better or a more expensive wine, a good wine? Anybody who's a bit of a connoisseur in wines knows that the yesod of wine is the land. Like many times, if it's in Israel that way, it's that way in France, it's that way in California. You can have a place where it's absolutely most unbelievable place to grow grapes, and a few miles away, it's terrible. No matter how hard you try, you won't be able to. It's totally in the quality of the land. Zokt Nesivas Shalom, but when a yid has to grow, the growth of a yid is exactly like a grape. Eretz Yisrael is the perfect place a person wants to grow Baruchnius. The land to grow in, the place to grow in, is in Eretz Yisrael. That's where a yid belongs in. You leave Eretz Yisrael, you go to Chutz La'aretz, as good as you're going to be, and as much as you're going to learn, and as much as you're going to steig, but to be on that high level, to have without the Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, is impossible. Zok Nesivas Shalom. He says the same is with every yid. You know, every yid has to know that the same way it is with crops, with grapes, that's the way it is by a person. The Medrash says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created Shivim Umos. Hashem created 70 nations, and out of those 70 nations, He chose Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael is the chosen nation. 7 days of the week were created, and out of all those days of the week, HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose Shabbos. We know Shabbos is the day that's chosen for Kedusha, the connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And 7 lands were created, could be 7 continents, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu, out of all the land that was created, HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose Eretz Yisrael. Let me read you an interesting Rambam in Hilchos Malachim. The Rambam in Hilchos Malachim, Perek Hey, says, and he paskins, that one may not leave Eretz Yisrael unless it is to learn Torah or to get married, to get a shidduch. And not only that, even in those cases, the Rambam says, even in those cases, let's say it is to learn Torah or to go find the shidduch, even in those cases where l'maisa would be mutter to leave Eretz Yisrael, if you leave, it's not midas hachasidus. No, a person should even try then to stay in Eretz Yisrael. The Rambam says further that one should rather live in Eretz Yisrael in a city that's Rubai Yaakov, in a city that's Rubai Goyim, as opposed to living in Chutz La'aretz, in a city, in a place that's Rubai Yisrael. It's better to live in Eretz Yisrael in a place that would be mostly Goyim. And today, Baruch Hashem, you don't have that Nisoyim almost anywhere in Eretz Yisrael. Almost anywhere in Eretz Yisrael today, it's Taka Rubai Yidin. But the Rambam paskins that it's better to live in Eretz Yisrael in a place that's Ruba Goyim as opposed to living in Chutz La'aretz. Because why? One who leaves Eretz Yisrael, the Rambam says, is Ki'ilu Oivei Avodah Zarah. That's the Rambam. So there's a Ramban like this. The Ramban says in Vayikra Yudches, and he explains this inyan of Eretz Yisrael. And he says, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this inyan that HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose Eretz Yisrael, we say HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose Eretz Yisrael, you grow in Ruchnius in Eretz Yisrael, what does that mean? Zok the Ramban. The Ramban says that the reason is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chvoidoi u'ba'atzmoi is manig Eretz Yisrael. When you come, it's in Chutz La'aretz, it's given over to a Sar, a Moishel, or a Malach, Zok the Ramban. But in Eretz Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not give it over to either a Sar, a Moishel, or a Malach. In Eretz Yisrael has the is being run directly by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Nesivas Shalom brings down from the Torah's Avos, the Parshas Vayetze, a beautiful thought on the pasuk on this inyan. The pasuk in Parshas Vayetze says, the drush, we're going to say, the pasuk says, by Yaakov Avinu over there, V'hinei sulam mutzav arza. When Yaakov Avinu went to sleep over there, it says there was a ladder standing on the ground, V'hinei sulam mutzav arza, v'roishoi magia hashamayma, that the top of the ladder was Magia Shemaima, and we know the rest of the pasuk. V'hinei malach Elokim olim v'yordim boi. Zok Nesivas Shalom. From this pasuk we see that there are 2 ways that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is noig the bria. The first way is al pi derech hateva. In other words, everything goes according to normal. There's a seder, a zman, everything goes according to normal. That's the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world. That's one way HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world. In other words, you have a Rosh Hashanah, and whatever a person is judged for on Rosh Hashanah, the Derech HaTeva plays out from that, and that is one way of running the world. That, the Nesivas Shalom says, we see from the beginning of the pasuk of Sulam Mutzav Arza, where the way the world is running is firmly planted to the ground. Derech HaTeva. Then there's a second hanhaga of Nesivas Shalom of L'mala Derech HaTeva. That's where the pasuk says, "V'hinei Hashem nitzav alav." That's where Hakadosh Baruch Hu. It says V'roisha Nagia Hashemayma. Then V'hinei Hashem nitzav alav. That's the second way of Hakadosh Baruch Hu running the world, where Hakadosh Baruch Hu himself goes and takes care of things. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who's Rav Chesed, Umalei Rachamim, he's always ready to do good for people. So when HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes control by himself, then it's a totally different thing. It's L'mayla Mikol Seder Uzman. It has nothing to do with the first way the world is run. That's Al Pi Derech HaTeva. But once we say V'roishay Magia Hashemayma V'hinei Hashem Nitzav Alav, that has a whole different set of world. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu is being mashgiach on his own, that is L'mayla Miderech HaTeva. And this Hanhaga Zot Nesivas Shalom is only in Eretz Yisrael, where the pasuk says in the Devarim, Eretz Hashem Alekecha D'Reishisa Mereishis Hashana V'Yanach Rishana. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is constantly being vigilant, constantly watching over Eretz Yisrael. Nesivas Shalom says a very interesting thing. He says that for people that are living, and try to understand this in any way that you can, he says for people living in Eretz Yisrael, every day is Rosh Hashanah. When you live in Eretz Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu listens to your tefillas, he watches over you, he sees what you need right then, he judges you, and sends down the Shefa Bracha. For Yidden that live in Eretz Yisrael, it's a totally different life. It's L'mayla Miderech HaTeva. Every single day is like Rosh Hashanah. And this Hanhaga L'mayla Miderech HaTeva only applies in Eretz Yisrael. You never see that in Chutz La'aretz. And this Maisa, with this, what we just said, this explains the Gemara. The Gemara says in Masechet Ksubos, Daf Kuf Yud Amud Beis, and we've mentioned this Gemara before, Kol Hador Be'eretz Yisrael. Anyone who lives in Eretz Yisrael, Doimet K'mish Yesh Lekah. He lives and he exists with Hashem, with a God. And then it continues, B'chol she'ein hadar, someone who doesn't live in Eretz Yisrael, he's living K'mi she'ein lo yelekah. So what's Takim Pshat in this Gemara? What's Pshat? Well, somebody who lives, unfortunately we all live in Chutz La'aretz. And what does it mean that somebody who lives in Chutz La'aretz is living without a God? He's living without a HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What exactly does that mean? So the Sefer Meir Sinai, the Nesivas Shalom brings down, and he says that in Chutz La'aretz, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's not pshat that you're living, that person lives in Chutz La'aretz and Apikoros. No, like we said, in Chutz La'aretz, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives over the running of Chutz La'aretz, he gives it over to Malachim. In Eretz Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Doirish Oisa Tomid Einei Hashem Ba, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is always watching over it, so that's what it means. That you're living, when you're in Eretz Yisrael, you're living with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You're living in a place that you're giving over your entire life, everything HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because it's between you and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is running it. When it comes to Chutz La'aretz, K'misha Ein Le'akaz, because you're willing to give up that closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that your life should be run by a malach. In other words, that's given over to a malach to do the work. In other words, and not only HaKadosh Baruch Hu could work L'mayla Miderech HaTeva, a malach can only work Al Pi Derech HaTeva. The Nesivas Shalom says that Eretz Yisrael has a special koyach haruchni. What gives a koyach to Eretz Yisrael? It says the neshama of the entire world exists in Eretz Yisrael. And we call it, that's why Eretz Yisrael, he says, is called Eretz Chemda. Beloved land, Eretz Chemda. The pasuk says, I believe the pasuk is in Tehillim, the pasuk says by the Meraglim, when it talks about the Meraglim, Vayimasu be'eretz chemda. In other words, when the Meraglim came back, and the Meraglim spoke to Klal Yisrael, Vayimasu be'eretz chemda, Vayimasu be'eretz chemda. They sort of despised the land of Eretz Yisrael, the Eretz Chemda. If you take a look at this week's parsha, l'chayra you see, the Meraglim came back, and what did they say about Eretz Yisrael? They said about Eretz Yisrael, it's Eretz Zovas Cholov U'Devash. The Meraglim said that it's fantastic, it gives out Eretz Zovas Cholov U'Devash. So what does the pasuk in Tehillim mean? Vayimasu be'eretz chemda, that it was mias. They spoke about a mias. What does that mean? Because when it came to talking about the land of Eretz Yisrael, they said Eretz Zovas Cholov U'Devash, the Nesivas Shalom. That what they did is that they spoke about, when they came back, besides speaking about how beautiful the land is, Eretz Zovas Cholov U'Devash, they spoke about the natives of Eretz Yisrael, that they were very strong, and that we won't be able to conquer them, that they're those type of people. Look how giants, there's many, in other words, the Nesivas Shalom says, there lies the problem. because they didn't understand Eretz Yisrael. They didn't believe in the koyach of Eretz Yisrael, that Eretz Yisrael is a mile miderech hateva. When they saw giants in Eretz Yisrael, they saw people that were so strong and so big, it shouldn't have meant anything to them. When you go to Eretz Yisrael, the only way to go into Eretz Yisrael is with the emunah that Eretz Yisrael is a mile miderech hateva. It doesn't mean you could see armies of Arabs lining up on every side of Eretz Yisrael. It doesn't have anything to do with Derech HaTeva as we understand it. It doesn't have to make sense. That's why constantly we've seen Nisim and Eretz Yisrael, right? And constantly throughout the generations, because they don't live and they don't play by the rules of Chutz La'aretz. They don't play by the rules of Derech HaTeva. It shouldn't have mattered to the Malachim what anything looked like in Eretz Yisrael. Once they didn't have their emunah, once you're without that emunah, so the only punishment they could have had is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told them. The only punishment is you can't go to Eretz Yisrael. You don't appreciate it. You don't understand what it's all about. Chazal tell us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave three things to Klal Yisrael, like we said at the beginning. Shabbos Kodesh, Eretz Yisrael, because all these things, the root of this is that all these things have a koyach me'al tivi. They have a koyach l'mala miderech hateva, and you have to appreciate it. You have to appreciate, especially here in this week's parsha, we're talking about Eretz Yisrael, that through emunah, if a person believes and understands that Eretz Yisrael is different, then he's able to live in Eretz Yisrael. And you think about it, people, sometimes you have to think about this when you go to Eretz Yisrael. And it's kedai to think about. Everybody should be zoicha to make the trip as often as they can. And Mashiach should come. We should all be there. But when a person goes to Eretz Yisrael, he has to understand that as close as we think that we learn and we daven and we want to try to do everything right here in Chutz La'aretz, when you come to Eretz Yisrael, there's a direct line. There's a special hashgacha. People go to Eretz Yisrael. You go be mispal in Eretz Yisrael. HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself is listening to you. And you have a chance for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to give you himself exactly what you need. That's Pshat in Eretz Yisrael. And that was the time of the Meraglim. Meraglim spoke Lashon Hara on Eretz Yisrael, which was a terrible thing. Let's learn the lessons, like we said, from all these parshas of talking, always thinking good about other people, talking good, not only talking about inanimate things, talk about Eretz Yisrael, talk about those kind of things, that we should learn the lessons, we should grow from it, we should learn the lessons of tefillah in Eretz Yisrael, of living in Eretz Yisrael. And no, this shiur was not sponsored by Nefesh B'Nefesh, but we have, like I've said, the shiur is unfortunately being given in the Chutz La'aretz. Nobody sponsored the shiur to sponsor trips, that everybody should take trips to Eretz Yisrael. But a person should understand and appreciate what it is and how lucky the people who are actually there and how lucky they are to actually live in Eretz Yisrael. And we should be zoicha, every one of us, to go there and finally stay there for good and to be in Eretz Yisrael with Mashiach Tzidkenu.